Hey guys, welcome back to the interesting video on Wild Rift. So today we're back with a tier list for patch 6.08, and it's been a long time since we did our last tier list. A lot of things have happened. We have the addition of the new champions Rumble and Victor. We haven't even done a tier list since Victor has been released, so it's really been quite some time. We have the addition of Yordle Trap, and we of course have the new map, we have the durability change, and one of the most significant changes is going to be the durability change, because tanks are now really good, tank shredders in turn are now really good as well, and assassins are a lot worse. So let's get straight into it in the Baron lane now. Today we're going to be doing a in-depth view on almost every champion on the tier list in as fast a time as possible. So if you guys need to skip certain parts of the video or skip to the parts that you want, of course you can go ahead and do that. We'll be covering everything from S plus to C, from left to right. So this will be a long one, so just feel free to skip. So let's first start off in the Baron lane at the S plus tier. So Camille is actually now the top dog in the Baron lane. Now she has been increasing in popularity, and I have seen her very, very often. And she's really good just for a couple of reasons, right? Firstly, she's really strong in lane. If you're good at her, she can be really good. She can lock down carries and deal with them, but at the same time, she has true damage. So she can deal with the tanks as well with the insane Q damage, especially after you have like Triforce or Divine Sunder. She also can build Bork, and of course, Thunder Sky is now in the game, so it makes her a lot better as well. Since the last time she was, really good, that was a long time ago, but now she's really insane. Now, of course, we have insane tanks like Ornn. Ornn, of course, benefits a lot from the durability update, especially because his passive amplifies the defenses he gets even more. And of course, Ornn was already very good, so he's just now even better. Now, Rumble is actually a very, very strong champion. Now, why is he all the way up at the S plus? Well, basically because he does really well against both tanks and squishies. So he does build Leandries, and he does have constant DPS with his Q, which lasts for a relatively long duration. So his DPS is actually really good. His E can shred the defenses of tanks and squishies alike. Of course, more effective against squishies. Huge team fight ultimate, a bit hard to aim, but huge impact ultimate. So he can deal very well with both tanks and squishies. So overall, just an insane AP carry in the top lane. And then we have the two fighters who are Ambessa and Jax. Now, the deal with these two is that they do a really good amount of damage, but at the same time, they build fighter items, so they are really tanky at the same time. So, of course, tanky fighters are also in a very decent spot. And then in the S tier, you have Mordekaiser, and I think Mordekaiser is a very kind of hit or miss champion. Like depending on how good you are at Mordekaiser, the linchpin of his kit is his ulti, and really good Mordekaiser ultis change the game. If you ult the jungler and take them out of fight, you ult the ADC, take them out of fight, it can win your team the fight, or even get your team an objective steal. But if you ult a 1 HP guy who's already gonna die, it's a complete waste, and sometimes it even helps the guy escape. Sometimes you die 1v1 if you ult the wrong guy inside your ulti. So it's really very hit or miss. But when you play it optimally, he is still a very strong champion. So other strong champions who are tanks in the top lane are Garen and Sion. Still very just strong and easy to play tanks. But I think Ornn is the best tank to play at the moment if you want to play a tank. Now I think Aatrox is still really decent if you're good at him. Of course, his sweet spot damage is insane, and his matchup against tanks is pretty good as well, especially because of his passive doing percent health damage and healing him. Also, a good thing about Aatrox against tanks is when he pops the ulti, he basically heals for free against tanks. So it makes the squishies it makes it such that he can heal off the tanks and then go for the squishies in the backline with his movement speed. So he's really decent. Of course, when tanks are good, Gwen is always going to be part of the meta because Gwen, of course, is really good at dealing with tanks. Fiora is also really good at dealing with tanky champions and fighters because of her true damage. She's a really good split pusher. But I think at the moment, Camille is just a superior version to Fiora, who are very similar because Camille has a better team fight and can deal with tanks and split push as well. So I think Camille is just a better version. So next three champions, now I didn't order these three champions like that on purpose, but the next three champions are champions that can build Yordle Trap. So Singe, Darius, and Set are all champions with displacement abilities, and they can build your Yordle Trap either as a first item or like as an early item. It's really good for snowballing and just gives you a very solid stat line, which is kind of what you want anyway. But even notwithstanding, Sinch is still a very strong champion if you know how to play him properly. He still has that weird play style, with your glue trap and your fling and things like that. Darius, of course, got really a lot better because he is, after all, a very tanky champ, right? And everyone being more tanky only helps him because he can stack passive more easily onto them, and then he can transfer the passive to other people. Set, of course, still really decent. Is a health builder, and of course in the tank meta, Set is always going to be decent, but I just think there are better options. Maokai is also really decent full on like tank you can play in the top lane. And Renekton is a very strong early game champion. However, especially against the tanks, you really have to get early kills and snowball. So he's really not as good as he once was. Volibear, another tanky fighter. Mundo, another full-on just very tanky tank. And Shen has actually moved up on my tier list by a lot because I played with a ton of Shens recently, and I actually do think he's a lot better now in this tank meta, especially with the ulti. Now, some people that have moved down are champions like Wukong and Riven. I really don't think they deal with tanks very well, and they really have to kind of snowball to really do well. Same goes for champions like Urgot, who I've kind of moved down a little bit just because there are a lot better tanky fighter options. Of course, Malphite always gonna be a solid team fight option, and then we have a couple of solid um, other picks. Pantheon still pretty alright, not good against tanks, but can roam and snowball. Vladimir just a really good late game option. Gragas can build AP or tank. Of course, tank at the moment is better, especially in the Baron lane. And Olaf deals decently with tanks, with him being able to slow them down and also dealing true damage. Teemo is actually a really decent champion because he builds Liandry's like first or second item, so he actually deals with tanks really, really decently. So Teemo is a pretty decent champion to play right now, but he's very single target. So in the late game, he's generally quite useless. Yone cannot build tank and doesn't deal with tanks very easily, so he's taking a huge hit. As are other champions like Jace, Akali, and Fiora, all not really the best in a tank meta because they don't deal with tanks very well. Tank Jarvan top is still decent as is Nautilus, but you just have better options. And Vayne is a pretty niche counter pick into certain champions that can't really dash and are tanky. I mean, even if they can dash, it can still be a counter, so it's good into, for example, like Ornn, Darius, maybe even Set, Sion, things like that. But of course, you're losing out on a tank if you take Vayne in the top lane. Then we have some DPS champions, Tryndamere, Lucian. We have, of course, Graves, all just not very good in the meta at the moment. Kennen, not very good either, despite him still getting buffed because his ulti doesn't really do very much. And of course, in the tank meta, you can't really burst people down, which is basically what Kennen supposed to do. So he's not doing too hot right now. And of course, Nasus and Kill, just scaling champions, just not very good whatsoever. But with that said, let's move on to talking about the jungle. Okay, so now moving on to the jungle, you can see I'm really trying to speed through this as quickly as I can because this is gonna be a long, long video if I don't. But basically, Amumu is the new king of the jungle. After he got those buffs, he is almost unkillable. He has to play like a complete idiot to really get killed. He's like getting banned very often now, and he's straight up just the strongest jungler. I mean, huge AoE teamfight ultimate, 2 instances of CC on his bandage toss, percent health damage on his cry to deal with other tanks, and he's super duper tanky himself, even having damage reduction from the E. He is just by and large far and away the best jungler at the moment. He can be in a tier of his own, pretty much. And then you have the other amazing S plus champions. I still think that champions like Mbessa and Vi, the reason why they're really strong is because they have really good hard engage, really good chase down potential. They're really tanky, so champions like ADCs and mages cannot kill them easily, but at the same time they do a decent amount of damage, and they can probably not the probably they can 1v1 like ADCs and mages in the early to mid game and just kill them 1v1, so they're just really strong. Now, we have the Hecarim there as well. Hecarim is sort of like a tanky fighter, but he does do really well in this current meta. He's not the best at dealing with tanks, but he's just a really strong champion right now. And same goes with Echo. Now, Echo is not amazing at dealing with tanks, but he does have amazing ganks. He one shot squishies, and it comes to a point where he's really strong, and he can even do significant damage to tanks. Not one shot them, of course, but he can hurt them a lot. Right, so Lee Sin for the first time in a long time is falling out of S plus because he's really just a lethality champion. He can build fighter, of course, but he's just not as good when you build fighter. But same as always, he's always going to be a decent champion if you're good at him. Now, Rumble is still in the picture. I'm going to be honest here. I haven't actually seen Rumble jungle a lot, but I know Rumble can be played in the jungle. I think he has a decent clear, and I believe that he should probably be a really good champion in the jungle. So next up we have Warwick. So Warwick did get a couple rounds of nerfs, but I think at this point he is still really strong. Single target lockdown is really good. He deals with tanks pretty decently, since he normally builds like you know, anti-tank items like Terminus, Bork, or even Riftmaker. So he is, pretty good at dealing with tanks. He is pretty tanky himself, insane healing, and really good map rotations. Kha'Zix is an assassin, but he's actually still good. And the reason why this is the case is because he has really good DPS. Like Kha'Zix is one of those assassins that have really good DPS because his Q cooldown is so low. He's able to DPS tanks consistently, and he can actually deal with tanks if they're isolated. Now, Viego has definitely taken a step down, simply because he's a reset champion, and it's really hard to get resets against like a tanky frontline and things like that. And I keep talking about tanks and the tanky frontline because now in this meta, tanks are very popular, and there's always going to be like one, two, three, or even four tanks on an enemy team. So I always I'm gonna refer to talking about tanks because there's pretty much always going to be one. I mean, if the enemy team doesn't have a tank, they're kind of trolling. So yeah. So Viego has hard time resetting against tanks, but he can build the anti-tank items like Bork or like Divine Sunder, so he can kind of deal with them through his itemization. And of course, when he gets a reset, he just takes other people's items anyway, so it's gonna basically work out for the most part. And then we have Lilia. Now, Lilia is really good at dealing with tanks because she does have that damage over time combined with Liandry. So in the long run, she can kill them. But again, she kind of takes a long time to kill them. So she's not the best at dealing with tanks either. But she can deal with squishies pretty well. She has a very fast clear, and she's just a decent jungler. Now we have some pretty good ganking champions. So we have Pantheon, who's a really insane ganker. We have Xin Zhao, who's a very insane ganker, and they're still kind of in the upper echelons of the jungle tier list. Then we have a couple of good tanks slash fighters, Maokai, Rammus, as well as Volibear, all really good ganks and just really tanky champions in general. Shyvana kind of in the middle ground. She has not good ganks, but really really fast clear, and when she kind of scales, she scales really quickly. Jarvan, insane ganks and pretty tanky, but I think Vi is just the better version of Jarvan at the moment, although Jarvan is still really decent. And then we have Gwen again. When tanks are popular, Gwen is generally always going to be good because she can kind of deal with them. And then looking at A plus, you can see that Wukong and Kayn have kind of taken a big hit this patch. Simply because they are not that amazing in the tank meta. That Kayn can go red Kayn, but he just really is not that good. I have not gone threatened by a Kayn for quite some time now, and that kind of just shows how weak he actually is. Um, Wukong, kind of similar. He's not really that good right now. And then you do have a couple of assassins here. You do have your Evelynn and your Rengar, and while they cannot one-shot tanks, they can still one-shot squishies. And in the confusion of solo queue, this does happen quite a bit. So you can still snowball and get a lead, especially Evelynn with the invisibility can take advantage of the fact that people are really not paying attention in solo queue. You can snowball and you can kill, but once again, you are an assassin and you cannot really deal with tanks whatsoever. So you still have other like decent fighters. We've talked about Aatrox and Olaf in the top lane already. Mundo, Gragas, same thing. Yone as well. Now, Jax, I think not a very fast jungle clear, but does end up scaling really well. And Neela is kind of the same deal as Jax. And I've actually seen a couple of Neela jungles, and they have actually done pretty well. Because especially in this kind of tanky meta, they will eventually reach a point where they have a lot of DPS and they can eventually deal with the tanks, but not in the early or mid game, only kind of in the late game. So they really need a lot of time to scale, which is a little bit of a drawback. Darius, of course, still really good in this tank meta. Mordekaiser, we've kind of explained him in the top lane already, so it's kind of the same deal here, except with jungle, your role's a little bit different because you do have the smite. We have Nunu and Shen who moved up quite a bit because they are really solid tanks and with really solid ganks, especially with Shen being having the global ulti to kind of help people out. Now, couple of champions have taken a huge fall from grace. Talon, Riven, Diana. Now, the issue with Talon and Diana is now in this tank meta, they cannot really one-shot people very easily. And Talon is so weak. And he's not like so weak, but he's weak to an extent that even as an ADC, I'm not getting one-shot by him. I've survived Talon's full engages multiple times as an ADC. You probably will see that in one of my videos later on. But if Talon cannot one-shot an ADC, that's an issue, right? He should be able to just one-shot me, and he just doesn't do enough damage after the durability patch. Same for pretty much a lot of the other champions in the A tier. Champions like Diana, Fiddlesticks, Fizz cannot really one-shot people too easily. And then the other fighter champions like Master Yi, Riven, you know, and to some extent like Kindred and Graves as well, just not really the most suited to the current um meta. Now Twitch is still horrible in the jungle after those round of nerfs. I actually forgot to move Morgana up because Morgana does build the engines and does actually do decently well in this current meta. So I'll probably put her up in the A plus tier, but I forgot to move her up here. And then Tryndamere as well as Malphite and Nasus still kind of horrible. Nothing new there. Okay, so now into the mid lane. Now, last time before this patch or before the durability update, the assassins were kind of ruling the game, and by that I mean like the Cassidins, the Zoes, all those like kind of one shot style kind of champions. But now, of course, the situation has changed dramatically, and it's now about control mages. So now the best kind of picks are actually like Victor and Orianna, champions who have very consistent DPS, who can constantly chip away at the enemies, like the front line, like whoever you can hit. Basically, they are just really strong. So Victor and Oriana, I think, are in a tier of their own, sort of like the S plus plus tier, if there's such a thing. So they are still really strong. Now Syndra, still very decent as well. She kind of wants to one-shot people, and if you have a misstepping carry, you can definitely do that, but you still do decent DPS against frontline and just in general, so she is still kind of really good. Now, I personally think that Lysandra is just really a strong champion because she has so much CC, lockdown and peel that she can kind of just set up your teammates, and things like that. She doesn't really deal very well with tanks though, and you might be wondering why is Yasuo in the S plus tier. Well, basically, Yasuo now builds like tanky items pretty much. He builds like Wits and Divine Thunder, like tanky items like that, and he becomes like a fake tank himself. And what I mean by a fake tank is that he just becomes a very tanky fighter. He's not like a damage carry anymore. He's sort of like as if you're playing like a Ambessa or Jax kind of thing like that. He's just a very tanky fighter, and he works very well with tanks because a lot of tanks have knockups, so he just is in a pretty strong spot. So a lot of the assassins are now in the S tier, and they are still very decent, right? Like if you give them enough time to scale, they're still gonna be really good, right? Champions like Echo, champions like Cassidin, when you reach mid to late game and you get items, you can actually deal with tanks pretty decently, but the issue is getting to that stage. Vladimir also kind of like that. Although champions like Zoe and Akali deal with tanks a lot less, but of course, it's not a game of only tanks, right? You can still one-shot squishies, and then your tanks have no damage behind them anymore, and things like that. Now, Ziggs is a little bit of a weird one because he is both a DPS and a burst champion at the same time. Like he can get enough damage to like kind of just one-shot people, but at the same time, he's sort of like more of a poke kind of mage where you can just toss things out. So he's still in a decent spot. Like, um, you can still just keep on poking down tanks, poking down front line, and getting AoE damage, things like that. And Galio is a very strong tank himself, but even the AP version is actually pretty decent. And then you have Zed as well as Yone, who are basically assassins in a way, and they can deal with the squishies very well. I mean, the issue with Zed is that he can kind of ignore the front line by just shadowing in and then just ulting the backline, and with that you can just assassinate people. So Zed is still really decent because he does have the backline access. And then you have champions like Morgana as well as Aurelion Sol, who can deal with tanks really well. So I actually think Morgana is kind of in the best spot she has been in a very long time, just because of how well she can deal with tanks, and she can easily apply anti-heal, anti-shield. She can easily get Liandry's and Rylai's, and I think Morgana is just really good right now. So a lot of the other like kind of assassins that really need to one-shot people, or whatnot. Champions like Katarina and Diana who need to like Katarina needs to kill someone and reset, and Diana needs to just one shot people in her first combo. Is just a lot weaker. Like Katarina is in a horrible spot right now. There's so much CC because of all the tank. Excuse me, because of all the tanks, and she can't really reset. I played Katarina recently, and there are so many times that I go in and like the whole enemy team is 1 HP and I die. So it's either like a 0 kills or pentakill kind of situation. But yeah, Katarina not in an amazing spot. Right now. So Heimerdinger and Corki, they're actually decent picks. They got decent DPS, but they just are not the best, right? There are a lot better picks than them. Lux is someone that can work if she is able to get fed and just one shot people, but once again, she cannot deal with tanks whatsoever, and she can one shot squishies though. But of course, there's so many other assassins and things like that that do a better job. Now, Rumble, we've talked about him in two roles already. You guys know why he's good. And then you have Brand and Zyra who are actually moving up a lot just because they are Leandry's builders. And if you can build Leandry's, you're going to be a lot better in this meta because you can deal with tanks. Now, Ari is actually not really a burst mate. She is kind of in a way, but she's actually a very strong skirmisher. So very good in 2v2, 3v3s, and fights like that. So she is still actually really decent. Just because of that, she has a decent DPS. Of course, her spell rotations come up real quick, so she's pretty decent. Now, Vex is barely hanging on to her position in A plus as is Karma because Vex is really just about one-shotting people and diving in. But of course, countering mobility is still very strong, so she's kind of a more niche counter pick. And then now taking a look at below A plus tier, um, you have of course people like Talon. We've covered him and why he's not good. Irelia also really susceptible to CC. Now Jace can't really one-shot people and deal with people anymore, so just not amazing. Annie kind of wants to one-shot people, but there's so many better options. Twisted Fate is just pure stun card utility. There's so many better champions to play. And then Gragas, we talked about him. Fizz, an assassin, but there are a lot better options. Of course, if you get fed, you will still do well. Swain is a tank, so it's decent in a sense as is Gragas, but just not very good. Now Akshan again is a lane bully, but finds it very hard to bully a lot of champions nowadays. Like if you swing in on like a Victor, a Lysandra or a Syndra, you are gonna get destroyed. Maybe against Orianna it's okay. Against Yasuo, you're gonna get destroyed as well. Against Echo, you're gonna get destroyed. So just the meta is just not suitable for Akshan um, at the moment. Veigar is just way too slow, takes way too long to stack, and can't really one shot tanks or anything like that. Seraphine is just kind of alright. Utility is decent, but aside from that, she doesn't really bring a lot to the table. Of course, carries like Lucian and Kayle in the mid lane not too good. Cannon absolute trash. And actually, I forgot to move Malphite. So here's another mistake I made in the tier list. I forgot to move Malphite. Now Malphite probably I would put him in the A plus tier. Now the thing about Malphite is Malphite mid lane doesn't build tank, right? He builds AP, and with his AP build, it's sort of the same deal as Zed, which is that he doesn't have to ult the front line. He can just flash and ult the back line, right? So he can one-shot the back line from afar, and that is kind of really where Malphite's strength comes in. I've gotten one-shot by Malphite more than once, and you basically Malphite's job is to be an assassin and remove like the ADC or remove the enemy mage from the equation, and he does that really well. So I actually think he maybe even S tier, but I've kind of forgot to move him, so forgive me for that. But with that said, let's move on to talking about ADCs. Now you can see I am trying to speed my way past this as fast as possible, because if not, this video is going to be an hour long, and I kind of want to avoid that. It's already probably going to be like almost there. But let's now talk about ADC. So the complexion of the ADC meta has changed dramatically, and yeah, it's almost like a huge shakeup. So the thing that has not been shaken up is Varus. Now Varus is still, in my opinion, the best ADC, especially because he has three very strong builds right now. The AP build really good, on hit build really good, and the ER into try build is just really good as well. Italy, of course, not very hot right now because we're in a very tanky meta, so that's not amazing. But he can deal with tanks very well with his percent health, damage on his passive, and if you build on hit, he just shreds them. So basically, if you can build on hit this patch, you're definitely gonna be doing pretty well. But if you can't, it's gonna be worse. The only exception to this is Twitch, who builds on hit but is just a horrible champion who doesn't do enough damage. So Sivir has shot all the way up to S plus tier. And the reason for that is because Sivir is amazing in a tank meta. absolutely amazing in the tank meta. You guys will see in an upcoming video. But Sivir basically, she has short range, but she can bounce her boomerangs onto the front line tanks and is gonna bounce them to the backline carries. And especially because there are a lot of team fights in the game, Sivir just does such insane damage now because she just bounces off the tanks onto the backline carries. And she can even build Black Cleaver to shred the tanks even more for her team as well. So Sivir is just amazing at the moment. Zaya also amazing because playing against a tanky meta, you face a lot of engage, and with your safety with the ult and with the feathers especially, you're in a very good spot. Now Kaisa is really decent because like Varus, she can build AP, she can build on hit, and she does percent health damage on her passive. And you might be thinking, why is building AP important? Well, basically because if you're with a full AD team and you play against tanks, they can stack armor, but if you're able to build AP, you are able to kind of circumvent the problem by a little bit, and that's the rationale why. So Ash is kind of a little bit of a mixed bag because on one hand the introduction of cleanse kind of counters Ash because you can cleanse the ulti, so she becomes a lot weaker in terms of her ulti, but at the same time against tanks she can be good or bad. Now why do I say that? Because she has no mobility, right? So if you get hard engaged on, you just die. But if you're not the focus and if you're able to play front to back, which in team fights a lot of the time you are because it's not so easy to engage on you on the back line, you are able to shred tanks very well because you built on hit and you also have slow, so tanks have a hard time reaching you. So Ashe is kind of like a lot of plus points but a little minus points as well, but I still think it's really decent. Now MF is probably the biggest surprise moving up into the S tier because she used to be really bad but she's getting better and better. And the reason why MF is really strong is because she's not a tank shredder. She is kind of a burst champion, but one of the reason why she's really good is because she's very, very strong in lane and very, very oppressive in lane. She deals with tanks actually okay with her ulti. If you just ult the tank in the face, a lot of the time the tanks kind of just tank a lot of the damage instead of flashing out or dashing out because they think that they're tanky. So she actually ironically does a decent job against tanks because they misplay it. But the main thing about her is that she nullifies the lane because she's gonna bully whoever the lane opponent is and make sure they don't get fed in general. And also if you're playing against like whether it's a tank or enchanter support, um, they're gonna have a hard time. So essentially, her to sum it up, it's just her damage is just so high that it doesn't really even matter that much. Now I think Zeri is still a very decent hyper carry option. It's one of the better hyper carry options, but I wouldn't really pick her over like Varus or Sivir or something like that. But she's still pretty okay. Now Runans is a must build item on her because of the tanky situation. If you don't have Runans, you're not gonna do very much. And Vayne of course is now back in the S tier because she just shreds tanks and that is just amazing in this current meta. Now Tristana has been nerfed to the point that in the early game she finds it very hard to get kills in lane even if you are with tanks. Um, so I think she's a lot more of a late game champion now. She's a lot like a scaling champion like Sivir for example or like Vayne for example, where you're really strong in the late game and not in the early game. But if you reach that stage, like when you hit late game, you are just an insane carry. You have a lot of damage and you have a lot of safety because of your range. So she's just amazing. Now, Caitlyn is also a little bit of a mixed bag. Why? Because she technically bullies tanks very well in lane, but she has a lot of trouble killing them, right? You can chunk them, but the moment they get to like 1/3 health, they're gonna play safe and they're not gonna let you kill them, right? So and Kaylin also builds like a bursty build, which is like the Stormrazor build. So she's not really that good at dealing with tanks, and her early game is not kind of strong enough like MF to really put her across the line. Like I would say that ironically, MF is a better version of Caitlyn right now because MF can just long range bounce those bullets onto you, and she can then get an advantage that way compared to Caitlyn, who is just gonna tickle you for a long duration before you finally get low and you run away, and you're not gonna die to her. Now, Jin and Ezreal are kind of in a little bit of a weird spot because Jin and Ezreal are both very decent champions. But the issue with both of them is they can't deal with tanks. Like, Jin's counter is tanks. He has utility, he has burst, he deals with squishies amazingly, but he cannot deal with tanks unless you're Giga Fat, in which case any ADC will do at that point. Right? Ezreal sort of the same thing. He has really good safety, so he's kind of good against tanks in the sense that he can't really get locked down very easily. He has range and safety, he has poke, but again, he can't really deal with tanks. So even if you build like Bork and armor penetration and Riftmaker, he just doesn't deal with tanks very well. So that's just not good, right? Corki's still there as an AP option if you want to play him. And Draven is is probably Draven should be above Jhin and Ezreal, so a little bit of an error there again. And why do I say that? Because Draven, while not the best at dealing with tanks, if you can snowball in the early game, you can then get to a point where you deal enough damage to deal with the tank. So you'll see this in the Draven video I'm going to release in a couple of days later. But in that match, I was against a very tanky Nautilus, and at the start of the game, I could not kill him whatsoever. But at some point, I got so fed that I finally was able to kill him. So that's kind of the situation of Draven. Now Jinx, another one in a little bit of a weird spot because on one hand a tank meta is kind of decent for her because she loves a good frontline, but at the same time she herself cannot really kill tanks very easy and she needs a reset. Normally on Jinx you actually normally reset against the tank because what normally happens, you play front to back, you can only hit the tank. The tank is normally the first one to die. You reset up the tank and then you kill the carries. But the issue with the tank being so tanky now is it's really hard to kill that first tank, and because of that it's really hard to get a reset. And because you can't get a reset, you're not very effective in fights. So yeah, not that amazing, but not horrible at the same time. So then you have the trio of Lucian, Samira, and Kalista. So basically the game plan of all three of these champions is you get a strong early game and you snowball. That's the only way we're going to do good and the only way we're going to win the game. I do have a Lucian and Kalista video coming up really soon, so you guys will see what or actually the Lucian video might already be out, but the Kalista video is definitely upcoming. But basically, if you don't snowball, you're going to be completely useless, right? These three people cannot deal with tanks whatsoever. So if you're not giga far ahead, you're not going to be very useful in the mid and late game. And furthermore, for Samira, there's so many tanks that there's so much CC that Samira is very, very hard to play. Um, Out of the three of them, Kalista deals with tanks the worst. Even though she builds on hit, she doesn't do very much damage to tanks. So yeah, Samira, Kalista, as well as Lucian, just not good in the meta right now, but still better than Twitch. Twitch, um, doesn't deal with squishies very well, doesn't deal with tanks very well, just lacks damage overall, way too squishy. I think Twitch really needs some buffs. But the issue with buffing Twitch is that Twitch jungle then becomes popular, and then he's going to take over in the jungle instead of the ADC role, so he's kind of in a very hard spot. Neela, of course, horrible against tanks because she has to go melee and you're just exposing yourself to all that CC. And of course, Senna is just better played as a support. But with all that said, let's move on to the support role and the last one. Okay, so last but not least, let's talk about support. So the name of the game obviously here is Tanks and Yordle Trap. Right, so obviously if you're a tank and you can use Yordle Trap, you are basically going to be up there. Right, so basically I think the best right now is actually Nautilus and or Blitzcrank. Now I think some people might think Blitzcrank is the best because of course Blitzcrank hooks you all the way over, whereas Nautilus does not. But the reason why I put Nautilus over Blitzcrank is because I think Nautilus is more consistent in the sense that with Nautilus, you do have you do have point and click ultimate, and that's really the big difference in my opinion. You have a point and click ultimate. Of course, with both Not and Blitzcrank, you can flash CC the person with your auto. Both of them have hooks, so they're really similar champions, but I think the key difference here is Nautilus ulti. So I put Nautilus above Blitzcrank because of the ulti. Obviously, both of them can proc normal trap, both of them can are tanky, and they both build tank. I think Pyke is actually really insane as well, because Pyke can also go first item Yordle Trap. And ironically, Pyke normally goes for lethality, but with how much gold Yordle Trap gives, together with Pyke's own like passive ulti, the gold printing on Pyke is kind of just insane. So, but of course, healing and shielding supports are actually still good as well. I think the best one at the moment is actually Lulu, because the reason why I think Lulu is better than like Soraka or Yumi at the moment is because with tanks and tank engagers, Lulu can disengage with the polymorph and save someone with the ulti or the shield, whereas with Soraka or Yumi, they do need some time to heal the person, and that's also why I put Emilio above Soraka and Yumi, because Emilio can kick the ball and disengage, or you can remove the CC, whereas Soraka and Yumi need some time to kind of heal your carry. So other engagers like Maokai and Thresh are still really good, but I just think that they're not the best. But if you can play them well, they're still going to be an amazing option. Karma is still a pretty decent option as well, despite like not being a tank, not being able to use your trap, and not really healing and shielding the best. Like she does have some pretty okay shields, but I really think that the poke from Karma is actually just really good, especially when you get Ludens. And this basically makes it such that it's very hard for the tank to engage because they're always gonna get chunked by you, and you tossing your mantra Q out all the time. I play with Karma a lot, as you may or may not have seen in my videos, and I do think Karma is actually pretty decent. Um, Lux, I still think is pretty decent because simply due to the fact that if Lux snowballs early, it doesn't really matter. You're just gonna get super fed and you're just gonna one shot people. And I think in the support role, it's actually better than mid lane because you actually have two targets to hit and one shot instead of one. So ironically, it's actually better. And when tanks are good, you're always gonna have anti-tank champions who are good. So Janna, of course, is a hard counter to tanks because she can disengage very well. So Janna is good. Senna is also really good against tanks because she can farm souls off of tanks a lot more easily. So she's also still a very decent champion. Braum also a very strong anti-tank champion because he can apply the stacks on them and stun them when they go in. Now Leona and Rakan unfortunately have fallen from the S tier. They are still really good tank engagers, but the main issue is that they cannot proc Yordle Trap. Actually, I'm not sure if Rakan can proc it on his ulti, but obviously the S plus tier tanks and the S tier tanks are just better than them at the moment, so they're just not too solid right now. Seraphine utility and anti-engage is just pretty good. And Heimerdinger is just a solid AP carry option in the support role who is not amazing against tanks, but he is a pretty good carry, I guess. Whereas Zyra and Morgana, they are both kind of AP carries as well, but the difference is that they have tank shred. So they both can and want to build the Andries early to of course shred tanks and they just do really well in this meta kind of because of that. Now Alistar is kind of funny because he can proc YOLO Trap with W, but obviously you don't really want to shove someone away. So you want to combo them with the WQ combo, which doesn't actually proc YOLO Trap, which is kind of an issue. So yeah, that doesn't really, that doesn't really work out. So then we have like Nami, who's taken a huge fall because Nami doesn't really provide a lot of value at the moment. She does have, of course, the healing, but of course, if you want that, there are better options: Milio, Soraka, Yumi, Lulu, etc. She does have CC with the wave and the bubble, but if you want that, any other tank support is better. So I kind of feel that Nami is kind of not amazing in the meta at the moment, so she's kind of fallen all the way down. And then we have Brand again, pretty good tank shredder. We have but inferior to kind of Zyra and Morgana who have more utility. We have Swain who's a decent tank. Gather is a decent tank as well. Uh, Sona, decent disengage and decent healing and shielding, but a lot of better options. Ashe kind of just there if you are someone like me and you are an ADC who needs to play support and you can't play a real support champion. Ashe, as I covered, is actually pretty decent, and in the support role, she does build items like the Serpent's Fang to remove shielding, which is very popular in tanks, and also items like Mandate, which gives you additional movement speed to help you escape from the tanks, and she slows them down as well. Now, Shen, I think, is really a lot better in the top lane than the jungle role. I have seen him play support a decent amount. I don't really think he's that insane. He really only has his Q to engage. He does have the auto attack immunity on the W, but playing against him a couple times, I never really felt he's a very big problem. And I just think other tank engagers are better. And Malphite just not good in the support role. Takes too long to hit level 5, doesn't get enough golden XP. So with that, we finally basically covered almost like basically every champion and every role in somewhat okay detail. Of course, I couldn't explain every champion to a huge degree, otherwise we'd be here for 2 hours. But hopefully you guys enjoyed this kind of extended version of the tier list. Thank you guys so much for watching the video, and goodbye.